too, just because you might say something I want to come back to. So, well, I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Dick Rynearson, and I did not do my research to find out how many years you've been an OPA member. Do you know how long you've been?
Forever, I think. I don't clearly remember. I know I did some workshops on suicide for the organization back in the fairly early 70s.
Okay.
So, at least since that point.
So you have a lot of knowledge both of OPA and how far we've come and helped us come that far.
Yes.
As well as...
And all of the struggles.
Yes. Well, and those are important to remember also. And I know that you were the founding person of the Psychologically Healthy Workplace Award.
Yes.
How did that come about, and how did you come to be interested in that
Well,
sort of thing?
It grew out of a group that was meeting at the state leadership conference. Representatives from a number of the states, and we were looking for ways of freeing ourselves from managed care. And I ended up on it by default. I was on a committee that OPA had formed under Pat James, and with Glenn Carr as one of our advisors, to take a look at how we might develop a separate sort of managed care company or an insurance-free kind of procedure. And so there were a group of us who were meeting and trying to figure out what we might do. And one of the members was assigned to this group in Washington, and unfortunately she had an accident and fell to her death, and so
Oh my goodness.
they needed somebody to step in. And I think I scratched my head or something, and they took that as my raising my hand. So I ended up with this group, and that was in 1999. And this group in Washington really floundered. We didn't know what we wanted to do, and it was kind of a debating society. But the following year, I actually missed the meeting because I was in Japan, and Suzanne LeSure went in my place, and New Jersey had come up with the idea of giving an award to companies that were psychologically healthy. And that got debated, and I went back the next year, and we picked up on that idea and looked at what New Jersey was doing, and so that was the origin. And I think we gave our first award in 03 or 04.
Wow.
And that we've now given 24 awards, and we've had, I think, 4 or 5 national winners.
That's impressive.
And at this point, I think we've given more awards than any other state. And we have as many national winners as any of the other states. So we've had a good committee in the state, and it's been, I think it's been a significant contribution. And of course, the whole idea was trying to come up with a mechanism to publicize psychology, find another area of activity for essentially clinicians, and I think it's worked well that way. We've gotten a lot of national publicity. The companies certainly have appreciated their publicity. They've used it in their recruiting for new employees. The not-for-profits have been able to use the award as part of their package when they've gone after grants.
Oh, excellent.
So it's served its purpose, both I think for the companies that have won, and certainly for psychology, and it's done a lot, I think, to let people know more about the Ohio Psychological Association.
Yes.
So I think overall we've probably had one of the half dozen strongest programs. And in part, that's a result of the very strong support that we've had from our central office and the leadership in OPA. For instance, we're the only state organization where the director, the executive director, and the director of communications and so on actually goes out and does site visits with us.
That's interesting.
And where we've had several of the presidents of the organization participate in the program. President-elect John Rudisill was one of the original members of the committee and did some of the first site visits. So it's done a lot in a number of areas.
Yes.
I think that's one of the things I'm really most proud of in terms of my work with OPA.
Well, and I know with this last award, just seeing the enthusiasm and excitement of the people who were winning the awards, it was quite impressive. And having seen it for the first time in DC, and how huge the national awards are presented as. You know, they really make it a very nice award ceremony. I think it has a lot of meaning that I hadn't realized in the earlier years, my involvement with OPA. So it's very exciting to see.
The award is now given in probably 48 states, the provinces of Canada, Puerto Rico, Guam, and maybe one or two other places. And so it's become really, in that sense, international.
Yes.
And it grew out of that very little program, and essentially a program that's only about 10 years old. So and I think the potential for continued growth is there. The thing that distinguishes this award, I think, from a lot of the other awards that businesses get is the fact that we actually go out and do a site visit.
Okay.
And we've had a number of applicants that go right up to that point where we do the employee questionnaire and the site visit, and then they back off because they don't think they could really stand up, I think, to the site visit.
Interesting.
And the site visit practice really grew out of what we do in psychology with when we accredit or approve academic programs and internships. And so that was the model. And I think that has legitimized the whole program.
Have there been any businesses that have backed off because of the site visit, but then reapplied or been nominated?
I don't recall any of them that backed off specifically for the site visit. Early on, we had a couple of organizations that we visited, and they didn't get the award, and they reapplied, and one of those organizations won our state award the following year and won a national award.
That's wonderful.
And so we give feedback on the visit. And this year's winners will get visits from us who did the evaluations, and we'll give them feedback, and they'll have access to the employee questionnaire and our comments when we did the site visit.
That's very helpful to them. That's wonderful.
It's free consultation. But also is good advertisement for psychology in the Ohio Psychological Association.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you mentioned that as being one of the top things that you've done with OPA. Have there been any other achievements that you feel really proud of that really had your heart and soul invested in, the way the Psychologically Healthy Workplace Award has been?
Well, in '99, I was appointed to the Education Committee, and then the following year took over following Terry Eimar's chairmanship, and I held that for about 7 years, I think. And Terry really laid the groundwork, I think, for expanding the convention, and during that period of time, again, with really very, very good support from central office and the leadership, we really expanded the convention. At one point, we had 2 conventions, fall and spring, and we got rid of the spring. It was just too much work and costly. But I think the conventions have grown significantly over that period of time. But fortunately, we had really outstanding people on the committee. I mean, that committee that's always been very active, and one aspect of the growth in the convention over those last 10 years has been the advent of student posters. And as of today, there are 59 or 60 posters being set up. And of course, the ceremony for the newly licensed psychologists. So the conventions have become bigger and I think a lot more complex. And the quality of the presentations, I think, has improved significantly.
Yes.
So that I'm really pleased to see what's happened. And fortunately, we had a series of directors of communication education from central office, Katie Crabtree Thomas being the latest, were very, very good and very helpful. And so that's, I'm very, very pleased with the direction that's gone. And it's got some of the very best people in the organization who are involved in that.
Yes, I think that's.
But I also chaired the ethics committee for a while.
Okay.
And again, simply because when they needed somebody to chair it, I was on the committee, but nobody else wanted to do it, so I ended up doing it for a bit.
And was that during a time? It seems that the ethics committee has gone through some shifts in how they supported the membership.
Yeah, the change that we underwent was we were, at one point, essentially an investigative body. And that was not deemed appropriate. We were taking risks. The lawyers felt we shouldn't do that. And so we shifted to providing information. We would get cases presented hypothetically and give out advice. So that was a major change, and under the last chairperson, that committee continued to evolve, and we did start sponsoring more presentations at the convention. The series that Attorney Glenn Carr presents developed during that period, and the ethics roundtables.
Yes.
So it's interesting to note that what's happened in a number of areas when the committees have been very active, and so we see the CARS programs and the ethics roundtables and so on, and the other ethics presentations, and all sponsored by that committee. Much of that after I moved on, but so that was a major contribution, and I think that committee has done a lot to save psychologists. And we know that there are fewer complaints against psychologists now, and I'd like to believe that. In part, that's a result of the activities of OPA's ethics committee.
I think it is. It's a wonderful resource to have, and I know a lot of early career psychologists and psychologists new to the state have commented that they really appreciate having somebody to call when they're beginning to get a little concerned or confused. So, yeah, that is wonderful.
There's also a very selfish reason for being involved in the committees. It's part of my ongoing education.
Absolutely.
If you're on the committee, you learn more than people who are not doing those things. And so it's a way of staying really up to date.
Yes.
And maybe out of trouble.
Well, and that's a great segue to some of the very entertaining stories that I've heard little bits and pieces of from your graduate school years and your early training. And I don't know if there are any special stories that you would like to share in your interactions with some of the big names in psychology.
I've been blessed from my undergraduate years with encountering some real first-class characters, and some of the big names in psychology. And so when I was at Temple University, where I got my master's degree, I had a chance to meet Joseph Walby, who was a very interesting man, and who came and did a seminar, and then we all went out with him afterwards. And took a course with Zygmunt Piotrowski, who was one of the top 3 or 4 workshop people in the world at that point. And he was a remarkable man. Very courtly, very old world. We met at night, one night a week at 6:30 to 9:30, and he came down from Sing Sing, where he was doing work on psychopaths.
Wow.
And at 9:30, he would always note that we were welcome to leave. He still had more he wanted to talk about, but we were not obligated to stay, and he'd go on for another half hour or more, and no one ever left. But I suppose probably the most interesting story might be my encounter with Albert Ellis. I served as a graduate assistant for the pre-convention APA workshops that were held in Philadelphia, and the workshops were on the campus at Temple, organized by my advisor. And there were 4 week-long workshops. Albert Ellis, Zygmunt Piotrowski, John Warkington from the Whitaker and Malone group in Atlanta, and a fellow's name I think was Hartman, who wrote a book on the 26 systems of psychotherapy, as I recall. And so I was assigned initially to Ellis, but for some reason I ended up with Warkington, which was very good. He was a remarkable man, and so we met every day for a week. But we got together for lunch, and in the cafeteria in Johnson Hall, and so we were all there, and there were other people eating in the cafeteria, and the cafeteria had long tables, and so Ellis one day was sitting in the middle of one of the long tables with my advisor McBurdy across from him, and I was sitting next to McBurdy. And everybody was always trying to catch everything that Ellis said, and he tended to be on the loud side and outspoken. So one day he looked over at McBurdy and said, "Well, McBurdy, I've just invented the perfect machine for sex therapy." And McBurdy, not knowing what was coming, said, "What is that, Dr. Ellis?" He said, "Well, I've invented a fucking machine."
Oh my.
And there were a group of nuns sitting off to his left at the table. Nice ladies, fairly elderly, as I recall. And they didn't hear him. And one of them said, "Oh, Dr. Ellis, what was that you said?"
Oh, no.
And he literally stood up and said, "I said a goddamn fucking machine." And this resounded throughout the whole cafeteria.
No.
With a consequence of dead silence. and
Did he notice?
he didn't care. I mean, he knew what he was doing, but that was his style. And McBurdy, I think, bit the stem off of his pipe. He could still smoke on those days. And you know, I'm just an innocent graduate student. And so, that's my favorite memory of Albert Ellis.
Albert Ellis.
Someone once called him a tempest in a what was it? Tempest in a bathtub or something. I don't know. There was an article about him. I don't exactly know what he had done, but he was certainly a first-class character.
Absolutely. And it sounds like had enough warmth that even some of those more caustic things that he would come up with still kept people engaged. And
yeah, he was a brilliant man, and but he was just very outspoken, and you know, that was part of his therapy. People needed to stand up for themselves and be assertive, and he demonstrated it.
Yes, he did.
So.
Oh, now, I recall you also mentioning having some very interesting instructors in graduate school, one or two.
When I came to what was then Western Reserve, now Case Western Reserve, for after I had the master's degree, and George Albee was department chair, and Margaret Hertz, who was one of the other big workshop experts, was there. And so I took a course with her. And she was quite a contrast to Piotrowski, who was very courtly and very old world. And she was very blunt, direct. Piotrowski knew the students, and he would help the women off with their coats in the wintertime, you know. And she never knew any of our names.
Interesting.
She was short. I bet she wasn't more than 4'10", and very kind of task-oriented. Because she was a consultant to the VA also, where I was interning, she went over probably half a dozen of my individual Rorschachs. And whenever she came to consult, the student who was presenting a Rorschach went into shock because she was blunt. She was sort of another version maybe of Albert Ellis. And we were scared of her.
Oh.
She was harmless, but we were scared of her.
Uh-huh.
And she was at the VA one day, and she was going over my Rorschach, and we were gathered around a desk with 3 other students, and she was a chain smoker.
Oh.
And she not only was she a chain smoker, but she had a rather large bosom, and she used to stuff tissues here. And sometimes she'd forget whether, and she might, if she had a piece of chalk, for instance, here's a blackboard, sometimes she'd forget, put the chalk down. And so she might have the chalk or the tissue, and we kept waiting for her to mistake and put the cigarette down. But at this one particular review of the Rorschach at the VA, she was smoking, and the ash kept getting longer and longer, and she had a cup of coffee, and she was leaning forward, and she was very intense, and she would talk with a cigarette in her mouth, and the ash got longer and longer, and the cup was under here, and we were all thinking we should warn her, but none of us had the courage to do it. The guts, really. And so it dropped off into the coffee.
Oh no!
and so we're now confronted with another task. Should we tell her? And we didn't. Nobody had the guts to tell her the cigarette ash. Did she drink the coffee? So, but she was extraordinary. I mean, she was extraordinary. You know, it was kind of the difference between she and Piotrowski. If you picture a nice alpine meadow, and Piotrowski would go through the meadow, you know, dancing through it, you know, this way, that way, touching just lightly on the flowers, and she'd go through it like that. One of my friends opened the door for her one day when class was over, and she just goes right through it, didn't acknowledge him or anything. I mean, so and she never learned any of our names. When she would give back the test, and I had her for another course in developmental. She was a good teacher, but she was so tough. And she would call you up to get paper, and she would call somebody up, and she'd say, John Smith, here's your paper. You got a D on this. It's terrible paper. What's wrong with you?
Oh, no.
Or you got an A. Or whatever, however, but she would make comments and oblivious to the fact that it might be embarrassing.
Right.
But and she may have done that on purpose because no one wanted to get called up and have it pointed out to your colleagues that you did poorly. And it may have been a very, very clever ploy on her part. I did very well in her class because I didn't want to be.
You were scared to death, yeah.
And I had the Rorschach course with her, and so that was a unique experience. I mean, she was an extraordinary woman who made such major contributions, not only in the Rorschach area, but developmental. You know, it was the Fellows Research Institute that she was very involved in, and she was, and her developmental course was tremendous. And then, of course, George Albee was there as president. He was rather charismatic. I mean, he met with all the graduate students, I think all of us, but the doctoral students every Friday afternoon for a kind of, his version was sort of a professional affairs session. I don't think we got credit for it, but we all knew we had to be there. And that's where he learned about psychology and APA, and he was president-elect, past president while we were there. And a lot of the members in my class have become very involved in both OPA and APA. Sandy McPherson, who was one of our first board members and president of OPA, was one of my classmates, and she's been very active and several other members in that group who went to other states, got involved in state organizations and also in APA, and that was one of his goals, get us involved, and he would somehow got us all to go to APA conventions, at least the ones in Washington. And I will have to tell you the story about he had a party for all of us, but other people were invited, obviously. And we were in the Mayflower or Mayfield Hotel, which is downtown Washington, fairly famous. The party, he was lively at a party, and he could tell jokes, and I don't remember how this came about, but the window was open. We were up on the upper floor, and it was people had a little bit to drink. At any rate, he was showing how you can kick a pillow like a football, and he did. He kicked it right out the window, and as a consequence of that, security showed up. And maybe the first time and last time that a APA president's party was busted by the police. But it was so he was he knew how to have fun, and he was just impressive. And well, another example of something, we had to take these exams. I think they were the generals. So psychology was divided into 12 areas, and you had to take 10 of the 12 areas. And so they were all given in the same week. So you were taking 5 days of tests, and began at 9 in the morning, and the first test would end at 12 or at 1. You could stay till 1, and the second began at 1. It was brutal. And I passed everything except one section, and that was abnormal psych. And that was the test that all be prepared. I had taken my abnormal psych at Temple University under James Page, who had quite a reputation in those days, and he had produced some of the textbooks and so on. But he and Albee had a very different view. Well, I answered the questions based on my experience at Temple University. So I went in and I told him I thought that his test was rather provincial, which I think back on it maybe not the wisest or most diplomatic thing to say. And he said, I agree. He said, you get a chance to take it over and it'll be more broadly based. So I took it over at some point and passed. But I think it says something about the kind of person he was when he would listen to a graduate student criticize the test he gave. Now, everybody else had taken the course with him. So it was abnormal psychology according to George Albee. So
they were primed, and you could notice the contrast.
So, and he and Dr. Page had very different views.
Well, and it sounds like Dr. Albee had a nice balance of being serious and being playful, and which fits in with his, wasn't he, prevention a big area for him?
That was a major area. Big focus on community work. And he had this vision of putting together really sort of a building, I guess, or an organization where psychology was dominant, and it wouldn't just be doing individual therapy, but where all kinds of services would be offered, but it would be under the auspices of psychology rather than medicine. So
that's an idea. Time may be coming.
And hopefully, but say he was a visionary, and
yes.
Sorry, this is
That's
not part of it.
Quite all right. It's good music.
No, it's the alarm went off.
It's time to wake up.
Set it for Tam. He was way ahead of his time, and he was trying to develop an approach that wasn't based on psychopathology. But he had a tremendous impact on all of us, and he was also kind of like the Chief Justice. If you were being mistreated by another faculty member, you could go to him, and he would listen, and he was very balanced. He wouldn't necessarily take your side or the faculty member's side. He'd try and resolve it in a very fair, balanced way, and in that sense, he was a strong chairman, and as a result, certainly I think he did a lot for our sense of being treated fairly and not mistreated by some faculty members. And there were several who really did tend to mistreat the students and take advantage. But it was a good faculty. Jane Kessler, who was still active in Cleveland, was one of the faculty members there. Again, very highly respected. I think she's now running a bookstore.
Yes, that's what I've heard. In fact, she couldn't come last year because I think she was come to the 60th anniversary celebration because she was at a booksellers convention of some sort.
But that was the experience at Reserve in those years in the 60s was really very it was very interesting. It was a great place to be because it was a period of the transformation of psychology. You know, Cleveland was a bastion of psychoanalysis.
Oh, okay.
And Albee was not a psychoanalyst, but almost everybody else was. And I was assigned to the VA mental health clinic, and everyone there was well trained in psychoanalysis. My group supervisor was a social worker who had been a lawyer in Vienna and grew up. His family was quite prominent, so he knew a lot of the luminaries in Vienna. And he and his wife trained. They escaped just as actually Nazis had arrested him and through a bookkeeping error and let him out. So he and his wife packed up their backpacks and climbed over the mountains into Switzerland. Eventually came to the United States, but they were both trained by Anna Freud and Mrs. Planck, Lucy Planck, brought the Montessori system to the United States and then developed at Metro General in Cleveland the first children's unit designed to help children deal with the psychological effects of being hospitalized.
Wonderful.
And she was an extraordinary woman. And Robert Planck was a true Renaissance man, just brilliant. But he certainly knew psychoanalysis very well. And so I learned a great deal from him, being in a group with him, being mentored by him. My advisor was trained as a psychoanalyst, but was also Carl Rogers' first PhD student. The chief psychiatrist, Dr. Glosser, was probably well into his 70s. He looked like a classical psychiatrist with his accent and fairly long, flowing white hair, Viennese. And one day during a case conference, he said to me in his accent, "I have something here that you might like to see. I think it's of some value." And he pulls out one of the original Hermann Rorschach manuscripts. And he loaned it to me. He said, "Hey, take care of it, look it over." And pulled it out of his drawer where all the pipe tobacco was. And so it turns out that he and Rorschach were good friends.
Oh my.
So we had a chance to talk about Rorschach a bit.
Yes.
And so it was just an interesting place to be. And then, of course,
wonderful
we
time.
were beginning to make the transformation into behavior therapy.
How exciting.
So that was a good time to be in graduate school because there were so many changes, and I ended up running a behavior therapy ward at the VA as a consequence of all the changes.
Yes.
But it was a very good time to be there.
Well, I think OPA has been very honored and blessed to have your involvement and your knowledge over all these years. And I know you've mentored quite a few people, and just professionally, but also this side of the profession, the more continuing education, advocacy, really advocating for psychology side of things, which is very valuable.
OPA has really been an important part of my professional life because I have a lot of good friends that I've met through OPA, and my wife and I get together with these folks as often as we can. And, but I've also I've learned a lot from people I've met here, and they've been very helpful in many ways. The committee work has been really so valuable.
Yes.
It's always bothers me that so few psychologists get involved to any degree with either state or national organization. And I think, frankly, being involved in your state organization is probably more value.
And you can definitely feel your impact, I think, more readily in a state organization than such a huge national organization.
And it's an opportunity for a lot of personal growth by being involved.
Absolutely.
And just the lobbying that we do. And I think we're far more in touch with the realities of the world we practice in. And,
yes, I agree.
And I think if I had not been involved in OPA, I wouldn't have had some of these experiences, most of which have been good.
Well, I really appreciate your taking the time to talk about these experiences, because I think that they will be of great value to the people who use our archives and refer back to the tapes and DVDs that we hope to put together.
Well, people may remember some of this. There really have been some remarkable people who have been involved with OPA, have gone on to national leadership, and one of the folks who was involved in the Oral History Project when we began last year, Dave Rogers, really extraordinary individual, and we owe our licensing law really to him.
Absolutely.
And we produce a number of national leaders who've come out of OPA. So it's a good place to get some sense of what the standards are. I mean, if you spend any time with Dave Rogers, for instance, and you have an idea of just how extraordinary some of the members of our organization are.
Yes. Well, and that, I hope, will also be something that these tapings will provide to the membership, current and future, because I think, we don't realize the incredible wealth of knowledge and experience that we have. We certainly know the good professional people that we're interacting with, but to hear the stories, I think, makes a really big difference.
And particularly the opportunity to have gotten some information from some of the old timers, people who have been around longer than I have been. We really we tend to forget our roots, I think, in some of the people whose really shoulders we're standing on. And, again, Dr. Rogers is such a great example that we owe, as I say, our licensing law to him and some other folks, but But he's the one who really wrote the licensing law, did most of the negotiation with some other groups. Certainly there were some other people who were very, very involved, but he did the writing.
Yes. And I think the passion to keep it going.
And he had the kind of diplomatic skills to negotiate and deal with the politicians.
And the medical association.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
this was enjoyable, and
I'm glad.
you didn't push me to tell some of the wilder stories.
That'll be on a separate tape. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see.